Welcome to the Filmmaker's Playbook. My name is Jason Branagan and this is a podcast all about filmmaking. On today's show, I talk to director Conor Morrissey. Conor's credits include documentary series like MacIntyre's Underworld and TV drama series such as Red Rock, Hollyoaks, BBC's EastEnders and Casualty. In our conversation, we discuss Conor's background as an actor, how he got his first directing jobs, what he learned making observational documentaries, how he navigated a move to directing drama television, working with actors, pitching and much more. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Thank you for listening. Conor Morrissey, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, lovely to be here.
I guess if we go back to the beginning, you went to IADT, the National Film School. I was wondering when you knew you wanted to work in film and television.
Yeah, for that I'd have to dial the clock back a little further, quite a bit further actually. I suppose I became very interested in the form probably in my teenage years. But the thing I was most passionate about then was acting. I really got into acting when I was about 15 or 16. I always loved movies, and with my brothers, we used to watch a lot of movies at home. But when I was about 15 or 16, I got wind through a friend of my brother's. He was attending a local drama school, and I just said, "Oh, I'd be interested in that." Because I was always a bit of a clown. You know, I like to sort of clown and entertain. We had a very kind of lively house. There was 5 kids, and you know, you really had to make yourself heard. You had to, you know. So I was always sort of drawn to acting. And then when I was 15 or 16, I joined this acting group. And straight away I was kind of, you know, I loved it really. And we had a really interesting teacher who was really into, I guess, slightly a methody approach. And we used to meet once a week in this church hall in St. Finlayder's Church, just at the top of O'Connell Street near the Garden of Remembrance. And we do these classes that involved all these kind of, you know, exercises to do with the senses and stuff. And for me, it was just mind blowing. And you know, so I was kind of, I guess, leading a dual existence in that I was a regular rugby playing guy by day, and then I'd go and do these acting classes, and I was more and more drawn to this world. So when I finished school and did my Leaving Cert, I applied for the Samuel Beckett Centre, which was one of 2 actor training courses in Dublin at the time, the other being the Gaiety School. And I auditioned for that in probably March of my Leaving Cert year, and we had to do audition pieces and improv and all that. And I got selected for that course. So that was my in really into the world, but it was through acting. And then I did the course for 2 years, which was an intensive actor training program. And it was looking at all aspects of acting, movement, voice, and acting technique. And it was 2 amazing years. We did it in Trinity and just got to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And it was a great kind of formation for me. And then I graduated from that and spent a couple of years in Dublin in the theatre scene, acting, doing little bits of TV. As I guess about a year or 2 into it, I started to question, actually, is this for me? And I started to move into the idea of directing. And with my girlfriend at the time, we formed a theatre company and we wrote and we staged a play in Dublin, which was quite experimental. Looking back at it now, it was I guess it was like a little mini film on stage. There was a lot of movement in it, and it was, in a way, it was like a little piece of cinema, I suppose. And I think that experience helped me to kind of galvanize the idea that actually, rather than performing, I think directing and creating stuff would be more interesting to me. So I then, having spent a couple of years in the acting scene, I then applied to Dunleary and got offered a place in Dunleary then. So that was really, that was the journey that got me to Dún Laoghaire. And I came into Dún Laoghaire a little bit older. I was 22 or 23, but having had this experience training as an actor and then performing, so which was, which is great. I mean, I think that time spent training as an actor and working as an actor has stood me in good stead as a director, because I love actors. I love working with them. I'm not intimidated by them. When I went to film school, I noticed how some of the students in the class, they were like really intimidated by actors, as if they'd imagined actors were these kind of exotic, dangerous creatures that you had to somehow tiptoe around. It's really not like that at all. They just need to be looked after, and they need to be communicated with properly. So that was the kind of, that was I guess a critical formation, which then, and that's why I then landed into Dún Laoghaire. And I think I was pretty focused on directing then by the time I landed in.
Yeah, you have a really robust background then in performing. So when you then were in Dún Laoghaire, how did that inform your approach to starting to make filmic work as opposed to maybe some of your peers in the classroom?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I came into Dún Laoghaire having spent time in the theatre and writing for the theatre. So I came in, I guess, with the idea that I wanted to make as much as possible, and I wanted to wrap my head around visual storytelling, around cameras. So I came in, well, like all of us really, I came in with a real desire to get my ideas down on paper and to test them with the equipment that they had available in Dún Laoghaire. And what was great about the course was that we did get to make a lot of stuff. I mean, pretty much from year one. What was great about year one is that we all did short films, but we each did different roles for each other. So in that first year, I would have been a sound recordist for somebody. I would have edited for somebody. I would have been camera operator for somebody. So it's like year one, we learned about all the different elements of filmmaking. And then from year two, we started to focus, but we got to make a lot. And I guess the advantage I might have had was because I knew a lot of actors on the scene. I was able to pull in cast very easily to be in these projects. And yeah, that was certainly one advantage. But I think getting to make stuff, and yeah, starting out in year one where I guess the stuff was a little arch maybe, and maybe a little theatrical, to trying to, road test the stuff and trying to just get to move towards a visual language that was just more cinematic. But I think that background, it meant I had access to actors, and as I said, I was very determined to kind of road test ideas on camera.
And your graduate short at Death's Door starred Cillian Murphy. When it came to completing that course and graduating and leaving with that film, I'm always curious then about the kind of in-between from leaving with this film education to becoming, quote unquote, a professional filmmaker, where you now go and get paid for your craft. And that transition, I think, can occasionally be painful. And I was curious what that was like then for you, leaving with that film. Obviously, Cillian wasn't Cillian then either, but yeah, what happened kind of post-grad?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't avoid the pain. It's really it's just a massive leap going from the cocoon of film school into the industry. The film I did with Cillian, it was the Fuji Scholarship film for that year, and that meant I got to take the film to London for the Student Fuji Film Awards, and it did well. It won a lot of awards, and it did help me. It got me an agent, and which was great off the bat. And I think once I got that time in London and with the getting the agent, it kind of I pretty much decided that I would then relocate to London. But I mean, yeah, access into the industry. I mean, you get an agent, but then what? Because all you have is a short. That's when the real hard work starts. And looking around at the industry at that time, I was very interested in music videos, because this was the early noughties, so it was that kind of tail end of the golden age of music videos. And the editor, Tony Kearns, who's a great friend of mine who I met, I met him actually when he was out giving a masterclass in Dunleary. And he was great in that when I went to London, he introduced me to production companies. So it was through Tony's introduction, I then got a production company to represent me for commercials and music videos. So I have that, and then agents as well. But as I said, that's when the work really started. Like you start to pitching, and your work was, we had these big U-matic tapes. My short film was getting sent around to all of the production houses, and you're just trying to get any kind of break, and any kind of job. And the first couple of jobs I got were very low budget commercials or music videos, but it was great. It was great to be shooting them. But it was hard, and it was London. It was expensive. So, I took other jobs. I worked with a furniture removal company, setting up these events, just to make ends meet. And, calls. I worked in a call center at some point as well, selling gas, British gas. I had to do all of those things to supplement an income, because the city was, it was a lot more manageable then. I think London now is, this was Labour government London, so it was more affordable. It wasn't quite as cutthroat as it is now. But I sort of chipped away in that world for a couple of years, and making bits and bobs, pitching. Doing a huge amount of pitching for projects. The amount of pitches I did and the amount of no's I got, because at the time there was so much. It's just London. Like, there was just so much talent, and you were pitching against really great people. And as I said, at that time, music videos were a real art form. So you were pitching against, really great people. And, I was getting the occasional jobs, but they were generally in the sort of lower budget area. So, yeah, that was tough. Tony, as I said, was great in that he introduced me to that world. But then, like, we all need people within the industry, I think, in those early years, to open doors for us. And another really important person for me was Donald MacIntyre, who was a Irish guy, a BBC journalist, and he had done a series of really hard-hitting undercover documentaries in the 90s. One about the Chelsea football hooligans, where he went undercover as a football hooligan, which were like incredible. And Donald, like, he knew my family, he knew my brothers, and when I landed over in London, I reached out to him, and I said, "Look, I've just landed. I've got this graduate film," and he was really taken with the short. So he invited me in then to BBC, because at the time, he was a powerful figure at that stage, because he had all this kudos from those documentaries, and he more or less had his own little unit within the BBC. So he asked me to come in and make promos for him, for, like, sizzler reels, pitch projects, as well as sort of for other areas in the department. So through him I got to shoot these promo films for projects that he had in development. So it got me in the door of the BBC, and Donald and I got on really, really well. And in 2004, then Donald had devised this long form documentary series called MacIntyre's Underworld, which was this deep dive into the criminal world in Manchester, Liverpool, and Glasgow. And he asked me would I be series director on that show. So I would oversee the look of the show across the 3 episodes. And that turned out to be a really formative experience for me, because I came in with the idea that I would sort of do master interviews, and I would do sequences, I guess, to kind of raise the visuals in the show, because at that point I was coming from the world of promos and music videos. So I was very fluent in that kind of visual, stylized way. But as soon as I started filming that series with Donald, I was exposed to another far more interesting world, which is that world, which is the world of just the observational documentary, where you suddenly find yourself in these really heightened environments. And the great thing about Donald is that he gets access, and he gets real access, because he's no fear. He just goes in, he either gets pictures on the ground, but suddenly when you're with Donald, you arrive in these situations and you are surrounded by the real deal, like proper criminals. So very quickly I found myself parachuted into these environments, and I realized that this is really, really interesting, because what you have to do in those as a director is you have to read the environment incredibly quickly, and you have to react sort of very intuitively. And whatever plans you might have when you go into those environments, they usually get thrown out the door, because these people effectively live outside of the norms of society. They live in these in this kind of lawless, slightly chaotic universe. And in that world, life comes at you very, very fast, and things can turn on a sixpence. I mean, on one of our early days filming in the Liverpool series, we were filming with this guy who was a whistleblower. Well, he basically blew a whistle. He was an enforcer for this major crime figure in Liverpool, and had been for 10 or 15 years. So he was, this was the very last guy you would want knocking at your door. But he'd become a whistleblower, and he basically ratted out all of these big criminals, and obviously had to flee, and he was living in a safe house well outside of Liverpool. So Donald, with his access and his contacts, had managed to get contact with this guy, because he felt this was the way in to tell this story, to go through this guy, which I thought was an amazing way to get it. And I was like, how did you get access to this guy? He's like, don't worry about that, right? I had the access. So on that first day, the idea was that we met the guy in a safe house, and we then took him into Liverpool to this giant Victorian factory down by the docks in Liverpool, where a lot of this kind of dodgy dealings used to happen. And we parked up outside the big gates of this Victorian warehouse, and we were setting up to do some shots of him arriving and walking in. And suddenly this white van speeds by, and from out the window somebody goes, "Rat," right? And we spin around, right? And Donald's like, his ears go up, and it's like, he looked at the cameraman, "Did you get that?" And the cameraman, like the marksman he was, he went, "Yeah, I've got it." And the security guy who was with us said, "Right, he's just been recognized. Within 5 minutes, there's going to be all kinds of dangerous people around this area here. We have to get inside now." So that became the story, So like we went there with this idea that we would do this kind of, not by the numbers, but just like, he's going to walk into this place, and then suddenly, boom, rat, boom. Right, this is the story. This is live. We've got to get out of here. And all the time I'm thinking, okay, great. So you're reacting, and you're going, and the kind of the shot list that you might have had in your mind is gone, and you're communicating with the cameraman and going, okay, get a shot of this, get a shot, right, we're in, we're out, gates closed. We're now effectively imprisoned in this warehouse, because we didn't want to call the police, because the police, we would have had very little sympathy from the police, because they would have gone, "You did what? You brought this guy back into Liverpool?" We just didn't want to have that conversation. So we ended up kind of more or less barricaded in this warehouse for the rest of the day. And we did all our master interviews, but they were done with this idea that we had to lock ourselves in, basically. And then later on, when we finally got the all clear, we came out, and somebody had put like a rock the size of a baseball on top of our rental car through the windscreen. So again, that was good telly, like. So it was like, got a shot of this, and I was happy, Donald was happy, the producer not so happy, because he was busy checking the insurance policy for the car, do you know what I mean? I think I came into that idea, thinking, oh, I'm going to do these master interviews. I'm going to create this sort of the visual language for this iconic television series. But actually, the series turned out to be really dynamic because we had gotten access to these very fluid environments. So I think that taught me a huge lesson about those kinds of environments and how quickly life can come at you and how reactive and intuitive you have to become as a filmmaker.
There's a couple of things I would love to just touch on there. One, I really appreciate the fact that you said after getting that agent in London and then after Tony introducing you to a production company and that's when the work really started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
it's hard. It's so hard.
Yeah, and there can be a misconception. I have an agent now, I'm going to get work. And
yeah, Jason, I thought that for about 7 minutes. And then apparently, and then I quickly realized I have got a mountain ahead of me. I mean, a mountain. And it's gonna take a huge amount of work, sweat, and it's gonna take a lot of no's. And it was so hard. But as I said, I think people like, Tony and then Donald, giving me these opportunities. And you get these opportunities, you just have to grab them then. And then once you grab them and once you're in these environments, you need to be just smart and, be good to work with and play smart and then build your network.
Couldn't agree more. I was going to ask you also about when you start working with Donald before MacIntyre's Underworld, you mentioned the idea that you were in kind of shooting and making these promos and kind of sizzle reels. And I was curious how that impacted you as a director in terms of what you got to learn about how to pitch shows or to pitch yourself, because I guess that's ultimately what you were doing in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with Donald, we would have sat down and we would have really analyzed what, who was the audience for this. So there would have been a lot of discussion about that and a lot of discussion about structure. And what Donald was great about was emotion as well. That emotion and getting access to a character and getting that sense of being invited into their world and revealing the person was so important. And I guess what that taught me was how critical relationship building was, in that for these promos, you could work nice visuals around, but what I learned was building the relationship with the subject so that they in these pieces we were doing would give the best of themselves, as a documentary director, because especially like not all people are natural in front of the camera. They might have a great story to tell. So I think I learned a lot about firstly sitting down and structuring and working out exactly who, what the message was and who we were targeting. But then also once we were working with these subjects, the relationship I had with them, the extent to which I could put them at ease was critical. And that's something I carried forward with all of my work as a documentary director. That period before you shoot somebody, getting to know them, establishing that trust, all of those things, so that you can then, they're then comfortable enough to reveal themselves to you, because these ideas were being sold on this character has done this, they live this way, they've done this extraordinary thing, or they've done this villainous thing, or they've done this thing, but who was the person underneath? And they could be villains, they could be heroes, but I had to get to know them. And on MacIntyre's Underworld as well, that was tenfold, because I got to meet a lot of people who lived in these worlds who'd done bad things, but you were trying to understand where they came from, and you were also trying to understand the context in which they lived. And around the same time, I did a series of workshops inside a prison in Borstal, and that was another kind of formative experience as well. Just going in to prisons and devising these kind of little short films with prisoners. And it kind of very much tied into, even though I did it with another company and friend, it very much tied into the work I was doing with Donald.
Did your background in performing help or hinder your work in terms of documentary, in terms of trying to, I know it's not performance in a traditional sense, but you do still, I think, need to get a sense of performance from your subjects. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, you do. You do. I think the acting background it always comes in handy because sometimes you have to wear different personas depending on who it is you have in front of you. And, and that could be, oh, I'm in front of an executive at the BBC, or I'm sitting face to face with somebody who claims he's killed 18 people in a gangland feud. The joy of the job, I guess, is that you're interacting with, say on the kind of executive level or on the subject matter. You're interacting with so many different kinds of people. I think what I have is the ability to put people at ease. I don't know if that comes from acting. I think I tend to try and blindside people a little bit because they come in to do these things. And oftentimes if you're doing a difficult documentary, or they may have agonized for months over would they do it, would they or won't they do it, or what are the personal consequences for me of telling this story. So that initial human contact I have with people is really important, and I try and blindside them, and I try and disarm them. I use humor a lot, and I try and put them at their ease. And oftentimes when you're interviewing, I found as well, like in many cases, you can write off the first 15 minutes because there's a kind of a breaking the ice thing, and it's almost like I'll start off with just preamble, or I'll ask them about something random, or I'll get talking to them about things that matter to them, and that's just a way of breaking the ice. And that I'd almost factor that into the interviews, because as a documentary director, like a huge part is the art of interviewing and what you're trying to tease out of people. So, and Donald again was somebody I learned a huge amount from. I mean, he would have conducted the main interviews in MacIntyre's Underworld, and he'd start off that way, but then he'd go for the juggler. I mean, there were times where we were behind our monitors, and me and the camera operator would just turn our heads and look at each other, and we just go, "Did he just ask that question?" Like, you're just holding your breath because he's put a really frank question to somebody, who's say a killer, like, and you're like, "How's this going to go?" There's this sort of a pause. So, yeah, I studied him a lot. I studied the way the game he played with people in terms of, starting it off light, but then, hitting them with the big ones, and then, but he was great. He was great though, and people would open up to him. They'd come up with all sorts, and then you go, "Oh God, they just said that," and you just think, "God, this is going to be great television." They've actually fessed up to that. So the art of putting somebody at ease, and then knowing when to land the big question, is something that is something I put a lot of thought into, and something I definitely learned from Donald as well.
So when you then had the opportunity to go and make docs, having previously acted, done some theatre, your graduate short was a drama, did you have any kind of reluctance about moving into documentary, or were you totally happy to dive into that world?
Well, I was always keen on doing drama, but at the start of your career, it's not like you've got many choices. Like, it's not like people are going, "Hey, what would you like to do?" Like you take the opportunities that come your way. Those opportunities lead off in all kinds of directions. I mean, I left film school thinking, I want to be a drama director. But after MacIntyre's Underworld, it was documentary work that I did because, and I could see why. I mean, here's where shorts come in, because I knew I was, that the long form work initially was documentary. And as I said, the MacIntyre's Underworld series was a big formative experience for me, because I realized I learned so much in it, and I realized this is actually really exciting storytelling, because we were in these very heightened environments, meeting people, who were right at the center of it all. Um, so I guess my plan at the time was, I was obviously always keen in doing drama. So I did shorts. I did 2 shorts. So I did a short with the film, well, at the time, the film board. They did this scheme called Short Shorts back in 2001 or 2002, a long time ago. Oh my God. And that scheme was, it was kind of taking the energy of this stuff, the kind of the music video world. And the idea was that these shorts would be 2 to 3 minutes, and they were all be very visual and bold and all that. So I did one of those, which is great fun. And that show actually really helped. That helped with my kind of short form work, and certainly I think that short definitely helped me with the getting into do the promo work with Donald, because it had a kind of a kinetic quality. And then in 2005, I think I did there was a scheme called Shortcuts, which I guess was the precursor to the Signature scheme, which may not even exist anymore. But the idea was I made this short which was financed, and they were financed well. So I did this short called Last Night, which had Liam Cunningham and Orla Brady, and we got the Film Board gave us like 75 grand to make it. So I guess as I was doing docs, I was making these shorts and using the shorts then to try and break into the drama world. I mean, I did a drama actually called Chosen, which was an RTE ITV Wales co-pro early on, but I mean that didn't go so well. I mean, it was kind of buried by RTE. I did the last 6 or 7 episodes of it. It was a 13-part series, and it was based on this Danish series. And Phil John, who's a mate of mine, a great director, he did the first 6 episodes, and I did that, but that didn't. It just, for a variety of reasons, it didn't do well, and RT kind of buried it. So that was kind of, I guess that was my first, that was 2003, 2004. That was my first taste of drama. And then MacIntyre's Underworld came out, and that became quite a big thing. And then that series was then concertinaed into A Very British Gangster, which was a feature film that went to Sundance. So I guess, my shorts were a way of trying to get into the drama world. But I'd be lying if I said that there was, because I really, from 2004, I guess, to 2015, I worked as a documentary director, and I got to do great projects, really great projects, and projects that won IFTAs. But there was definitely a part of me going, I'd love to do drama, but it was hard because you were being, pigeonholed was one thing. For me, Red Rock was a game changer, because I did a doc series with Donald called Breaking Crime, which was about set in all these it was set in these very marginalized communities across the country. And it was this very intimate access documentary, which I shot myself, because we were in very kind of edgy environments. We didn't want to bring big crews, but I think that series is a series I'm really proud of. And that kind of got me on the radar of the people who had started Red Rock. So Owen McCardle, the head of TV, he loved Breaking Crime, and then I think I was then asked would I like to do Red Rock.
Before we come to Red Rock, which we will, I just wanted to ask you. You kind of touched on it in terms of prepping docs. You mentioned obviously whatever you think your plan and your prep is, or your shot list, can go out the window like that, and you need to. I was curious then about your time on Hell Week.
Well, yeah, wow.
Because that's, very cinematic. I was really curious in terms of kind of your schedule and how you prep and plan something like that when you have all these helicopter shots and stuff that is akin to, big action sequences, and how that then fits in, I'd love to just pick your brain on that a little bit and hear what you have to say.
I did the final season of Hell Week which was in 2022. So I had more or less been directing only drama for 6 or 7 years at that stage. I had done, 2 seasons of Red Rock, and so I was very much in a sort of drama frame of mind. And Jamie Dalton, who's who produced the show and created the show, and he's a mate of mine. He called me about coming on and doing the final season, and we had a discussion about it. And he said, because I was living abroad, he sent me clips of the show, and I was kind of knocked sideways. I was like, "Is this legal, Jamie?" No, I was joking, but I mean, the show was, really intense and full on. And I loved that about it. I loved it. Just, it was no holds barred. And it seemed a very true reflection of the kind of, it was with the Army Rangers. They go through this kind of madness in their training. So Jamie, I think at that stage, season 5, he figured season 5 was going to be the last season. So he was like, I want to go out in a bang, and I want to bring in, a drama director to work on the action sequences with me. So that really and I was, my diary was good at the time, and I said, yeah, let's do it. So we, Ross O'Callaghan, Roscoe, had been the main cameraman for the first 4 seasons, but he couldn't do season 5. So Andy Cummins, who's a great cameraman, good mate of mine, he came in to DOP the final season. But really, basically the first we had about 7 or 8 weeks of prep on that. And those first 7 weeks was basically me and Jamie just driving around the country and kind of going, what about this? What about this? And kind of doing this whole like, what if? And because it was his baby and he had sort of season by season ratcheted it up a notch, he just wanted to go full on. And, he was like, I want to make this look like a Hollywood action movie. And I was like, really, how are we going to do that? And it was like, well, let's just find great locations and let's figure out, what these key stunts are going to be, because in the course of, it was a 7-day course. So it was a 7-day shoot because it's all live. You have all of these events, which, from them being kidnapped at the start to arriving on the island and all these various tests that they put them through. So we broke it down into, day by day, there would be this event, this event, this event. And a lot of that prep time was looking at the event and also obviously talking closely with the DSs, who were heavily involved, and they'd already done 4 seasons there. And they're like, they're characters, like they're like, they'll always push it. So it was a kind of a conversation between me and him and between the DSs. And then we brought Andy in at a later point to start thinking about, just visuals and kit and crew and all that. So it was, it was looking at how to make each of those stunts as outrageous as possible. Outrageous as, and Jamie, because it was his baby, like he'd come up with stuff. And I'd be like, can we do that? And he's like, yeah. Like, because it's ultimately, it was his company behind it, and when he pitched this whole opening sequence where they're on this bus and they come across the bridge, and the helicopter swoops in with the DSs on the side rails and hovers on the bridge, basically blocks their passage. It was just great stuff to pre-visualize. So I guess my job then was, once we'd figured out exactly what each of the sequences was to camera plan it, because at any one time we had 10 or 12 cameramen with us, and I would literally Google Earth the locations, and I would feed that into Shot Designer, and I'd start to plot and figure out broadly where the action was going to be, and what the shots were. And I also storyboarded a lot of the sequences as well, just because the big sequences, I wanted, I guess, as much control as I could have, given that it was all unfolding live. But there was Yeah, it's a funny. I mean, I've never done a show like it. I'll never do a show like it again. It was completely bonkers. It was that mix of being very prepped, but also once it kicked off and the train left the station, there was never a case of going, "I can stop, guys. Sorry, we can get that. We could go back to position one, please." None of that. It just, the train left the station and we had to pursue it. So there was a huge amount of, in the planning, there was a huge amount of logistics, as in they're going to hit this more or less at this point. I'd sort of cameras A down to H, is that number 10 on the alphabet, mapped out. And I'd color coded the cameras. And then it was like, okay, so Michael, you're camera D, you're going to be there to grab that shot because they're going to go from this point to this point. So I tried to give the team as much structure as possible. A lot of them had done 3 or 4 seasons of the show already, so they were very adept at kind of, if things changed, which they frequently did, they followed their intuition, But I tried, I guess, to, especially with the big set pieces like the opening, they were very well prepped. They had to be, I tried to give the team as much structure and brief them as much as possible, and also in terms of the framing, just sort of key frames, and just pushing the visual style that they'd built up in the previous 4 seasons. I mean, it was an absolutely wild ride. I mean, there was moments there where I was like, that kind of, I don't know if you've had this, Jason, the anxiety nightmare as a director, where you're kind of in the middle of a set and everything is just sort of happening, and and you're kind of going, what's the, at times it felt like that as well, but we had an amazing camera team. The DSs were like really great. And in the end, I think we managed to sort of capture that kind of epic kind of action movie thing that it needed to be. But that show was a one-off, and it was a show I'm really proud of.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say you guys absolutely succeeded in achieving that. How many chances did you have in terms of the opener with the bus and the helicopter landing? Was that that was going to happen once and you just have cameras on it, or did you get to do it again? Or
that happened once. It was once. So we had, it was everything. You had one shot at everything. I mean, I love shaking it up in my head and I love taking on challenges, but this was like, man, this was right out there. But it was one shot. So we had cameras on the bus. We had cameras positioned to get us various angles on the bridge. We had an amazing drone operator who came over from the UK. So, I had, with them, we'd all these prep meetings where we knew exactly where the bus would land. We'd figure out what shot he could give me. And then we had this helicopter pilot who flew in the DSs, who was like, incredible pilot, because he had to fly down onto the bridge in between, and there was like lampposts and stuff, and there was like electricity wires and all kinds of hazards. So, I mean, I was looking at the monitor going, oh my God, please let it all be okay, because it was one shot. And I guess we had to do a huge amount of pre-visualizing in terms of, them being led onto the pier and then getting that iconic shot of, the speedboats with the helicopter between them. Like we'd worked all this stuff out with the pilots, and we were like on cans feeding into the pilot and feeding into the people on the, the guys, the DSs on the dinghies. And we could say to them, just hold up for a second. We're just getting into position. So there was an awful lot of communication that was happening live. So it was high pressure stuff. Yeah. I kind of needed about a month to recover after that shoot.
I would imagine so. It sounds incredible. A good discipline, being able to figure it all out in one. But I'm just thinking the logistics of even making sure that one camera isn't getting another camera person in shot, and all that kind of stuff must have just been a headmelt.
Obviously, the notes the guys was try and avoid each other. I mean, in the plans, I tried to work a little bit of that, as in, and again, I was kind of drawing a lot on kind of drama, like sort of storyboards and constructing drama sequences, like you're going to get this, you're going to get this, and almost pre-cutting it in my head. But there was a huge amount of the guys working kind of intuitively together, and the camera teams were amazing at that. I mean, it was impossible sometimes, because if you had a drone shot over the bridge and we had shots of the guys on the bridge, the drone would catch the operator. I mean, I think some, in the end, like things were painted out in post, but generally you were trying to avoid each other. That was really something that Jamie wanted from the top. He didn't want cameras in the shot, because he felt that would break the illusion. So if we couldn't quite figure it out and it was just impossible to do, they'd just be painted out.
Right. Coming from that back to Red Rock, initially I was going to ask you whether, when you then went to a show like Red Rock, which has a chaotic schedule, very tight on time,
Yeah.
I'd ask you, was that a little bit of a shock to the system at that point, or did that feel very different coming from the work you had been doing in docs prior to it?
Yeah, the scheduling Red Rock was a really fast-paced show. I think we were probably shooting 12 pages a day on single camera. So it was really, really fast. I went out and I visited this set about a month before I started to shoot, and Lisa Mulcahy was filming that day. So I hung out and I just observed it. So that day was really, really good for me to do, because I got a feel for what the pace needed to be. And, I had a good chat with Lisa at lunch, and I was, picking her brains. And Lisa, I started out as an AD, so she was very clear in her days on scheduling, and she'd structure her days very precisely. So she knew at a certain point she had to be off this scene. And, and then, so watching her do that and watching her work really quickly, methodically, she was really well prepped. It was a really great kind of day of shadowing that I did. And that gave me a good feel for what the pace was. And then when I came to my first block, I'm with the AD and the production coordinator. We spent a lot of time looking at the schedule and trying to, yourself, Jason, from working on this, it's the schedule. Scheduling is so important. On Red Rock, it was absolutely critical, because that first block I did, we had this huge kind of emotional climax to the story. The Brian character, who was the paedophile about the relationship with the young girl, basically my first episode was where the whole house of cards he'd built around himself comes crashing down, and his wife discovers, his real nature. So it was a big episode. So I guess when we were scheduling those scenes, which were huge emotional scenes, we were trying to make sure we had as much time as possible for those. But you know how it is, like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like it was just tight all around. I mean, effectively, it was kind of a single camera show that was almost shooting at multi-camera pace. But again, I came in, I had on my first block, Decky Emerson, rest in peace, Decky. He was my cameraman on it. And I love Decky. I had a great relationship with Decky. Decky did my short film last night, so we knew each other well from that. And Decky was a huge help. And, and the whole team who had already done a season of the show. So I was very well supported. And and everyone moved fast, just moved really fast. And in a way, what one thing with Red Rock is that there was something about that speed which was quite energizing. Like the cast, the cast kind of, everyone picked up on the speed and the focus, because it was a very kind of intense set, but intense in a good way, because we knew we only had X amount of time, so everyone was sort of hyper focused. The time frames meant we worked in a very focused way. That first day, when I had that feeling, when it went from like 7:59 to 8, I just felt like I was in a different time dimension, where I had all of these sides in front of me, and it felt like a mountain to get through. So I tried to, I guess it was a lesson as well on that first day, a lesson in kind of economical storytelling. In that, along the way, that first day, I started to realize actually I've kind of I've over camera plan this. I don't need that. So I started to, that kind of process, which I carry on, just that process of editing during the day, isn't it? You may start off with 4 or 5, but 4 or 5 becomes 2 or 3, depending on the point in the day. Like, so you as your day progresses, your scenes well, but you sometimes you have to cut your cloth, and that's okay. That's okay. I mean, it's like, there wasn't a day in Red Rock where we didn't wrap at 6:59 and 53 seconds. I mean, you got everything out of every day on that show.
What was it like then, from the perspective of working with performers, having a performing background? Because I think with a show that has a schedule that is as fast-paced as that, other directors have said to me that they feel like they're not directing because occasionally there isn't time to really dig into a scene and talk to actors about a scene and what's going on and really work with them to help them build it, because it could be 6:55 and you have a 2-page two-hander and it has to be in the can in the next 4 minutes.
Next 4 minutes, yeah, God. Yeah.
Was that a surprise for you, or did you then just maybe develop a new shorthand for working with performers to get things out of them?
I would have checked in with all the main cast in prep, and I would have spent time in prep definitely with certainly the main stories, like Sean Mahan, who played Brian, because it was such a big episode for him. I spent quite a bit of time with him charting the journey through the block, because he had this, it was the culmination of his storyline, and he put so much effort into the show. He had, the way he described it was this character had had built this house of cards, and every little thing was another card on the house of cards, just getting away with his behavior. And ours was the episode where the house of cards came crashing down. So with him, with all the other cast, I really checked in with them in prep, and we really sort of teased out the story and discussed the story on the floor. You had to find a shorthand. I'd always kind of take the time with the actors. That was the one thing I didn't want to sacrifice. I wanted to, if something wasn't quite working, you don't go into panic mode. This was something that just needed the time. Generally, the actors were great because they were all so immersed in their stories. They didn't need a huge amount from me. But if they needed it, I took the time, and then you go, I'll make it up. I'll make it up at the end of the day. I mean, if you simply can't move on from a scene unless you've nailed the scene. And I think what Red Rock did, because again, I was now doing drama, I'm not doing documentaries. The thing I learned was, any director will know this, is that 15 seconds you have from saying cut, where you walk from the monitor to the actor, and trying to clarify what it is you're looking for, and trying to be as concise as possible and give a direction that will unlock something. I mean, that's a skill that I think comes with just spending time on the set. And I think in that first season, there were times where I was walking towards the actors going, what am I going to say? It's like I knew it wasn't right, but it was like, and then sometimes with the cast, then you go and you look at them, you go, and they're like, yeah, I know. And then it becomes something then, if you don't quite have the words for it. And then sometimes it's a case of, let's just go again. Or it can involve a more detailed discussion. But that first season was it, I learned the value of concise communication with actors. And as I said, that 15-second walk from cut to the floor, where you have to just formulate, you have to find the language or the note that might unblock something. But I think if you study the scene well enough, the script well enough, you know what the scene needs, that language hopefully should come, but I guess it's just making sure whatever direction you give is clear. And you're couching it in very encouraging language. Like you're not going and going, no, you're going, I love that, but so it's kind of, you're encouraging the actor while at the same time going, I think there's something more to be teased out here, and being kind of gentle with your note, not being hard. Recently here in Italy, I went up to Rimini to the Fellini Museum, and which is amazing if you ever get a chance to see it. But there was one installation where actors were talking about Fellini and his qualities as a director. And one actor she said, Fellini's great gift was that he could be close to people, very close. There was no barriers. So you felt absolutely in safe hands. And he had that ability to just be close and to be right there with the actor. So nothing else exists outside of that moment where you're just trying to, in a very gentle, encouraging way, you're trying to, on not some key beat in a scene which isn't quite working. So I think gentle feedback, being close to somebody, and being articulate, I guess, are the three things.
I love all of that. And I love that idea. It's a really interesting language in terms of Fellini.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, you say to whatever your AD, or guys, just give me a second, clear the set. And then your attention is all theirs. And it's like, and it's very collaborative. And it's like, I love what you did there. Let's try this, or there's something else here I think we can tease out. So it's very collaborative. And I think it's that language. And maybe, again, coming back to the fact that I started life as an actor, I guess as a director, if I were an actor, I'm behaving as this is the kind of director I'd want to work with, because, when I was younger, I did some acting on camera, but I guess I'm trying to be, the director that I as a young actor would love to work with, because that time in being in front of the camera, or, or working in theater, you realize just how important that communication is, that clarity from the director. You're like, you want to do what? Okay. And the energy that the director is giving you, that sense of just creating a kind of encouraging, playful, open space on the floor. And the more I work as a drama director, that's just really critical. You want a space that the actors can step in where they feel safe. You've done your prep with them beforehand. You've tried to get the script to as good a place as it can be with the writer and your script editor. And it's like, right, let's get the absolute best version of what this scene can be. None of us want to walk away without, getting all of the humanity and all of the nuance out of this moment. And the game, well, guess what actors is that they see it in your eyes as a director. They see that that's your expectation, and they want to reach there, and they want to give that. So it's a kind of a virtuous circle, I think that sort of thing. And I'll joke, the cast on shows like, say, Casualty or EastEnders, where the regulars are very confident, and say they do a take and they're like, and it's kind of not quite there. I'll come in and go, guys, that's a 7.5. You can give me a 9, surely, right? And it's just banter then. That kind of thing can happen, works quite nicely with regs, or where you've got a really good relationship with it. But for the more delicate scenes, I think, you have to be close to the actor.
It was a random Tarantino clip, and he was talking about not watching from behind a monitor. And I think it's very difficult in this day and age. We kind of have to be behind a monitor. But he talks about being beside the camera. That's where he is. That's where he watches performance. And he said that because when you call cut, the actor is going to turn and look to you as the director. So they are performing for you. So be there for them, as opposed to being in a different room watching on a television. And I thought it really interesting. It may not have anything to do with the idea of closeness, but when you used that word, it just made me think of him describing, I guess, that relationship that exists between performer and director.
I think Alexander Payne is the same, isn't he? Alexander Payne is always by the camera. It is. I think actors really appreciate it. I mean, on the shows I just don't do it because I'm pretty much in quickly, and I'm definitely, hopefully, giving the actor that sense that I'm right there with them during the scene, because you're in the scene together. Like they're the ones who are bearing their soul, and you're the one there guiding them through and making sure that that moment is as alive and as fresh and beautiful as it can be. And once you have that, then you move on, you know?
Yeah. And I think much easier to do that on a feature if you have a whole lot of money, as opposed to doing it in television where you have tight schedules and you kind of have to watch the monitor to make sure everything is there.
Yes, absolutely. I think on a feature film, I would be absolutely right by the cast. But television, yeah, you've a lot to watch. You're sitting there with your script supervisors there, and they're, you know, especially with something like Casualty, where there's so much kind of continuity. You've got your script supervisor, you've got your HOD beside you. There's a lot of discussions that are happening, and you kind of need to be there. But I try and make sure that wherever the video village is, it's not too far away. I'm always running between the monitor and the set. I try to get on the set, and I'll always, for most notes, I'll be there in person. I'm not gonna pass the notes down through an AD. I want to be there to give the note in person, especially with the guest cast, you know, who have a different relationship to the show, to the regs. They need a lot of, you know, a lot of care and attention.
You mentioned guest cast there, and you mentioned it previously as well when we were talking about kind of working with actors and how you're maybe communicating with them. And on your LinkedIn recently, you posted, which was really insightful, just about in continuing drama shows where you do have regulars and they have maybe played these characters for a very long time, so you're still there to support them, but in a different way. You said that you'll put a lot of focus and attention into your guest actors, and I was curious about your process, not just of working with those guest actors, but casting your guest actors, and what that looks like for you, and how you go about working with the casting director who's maybe on a show and the tapes they're providing you, and communicating with them what it is maybe that you want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think the guest actor, the guest cast are so critical. I mean, I've seen lots of shows where you watch a show and you can see entire episodes just collapse because the guest cast have either been miscast or they've been cast and clearly haven't been looked after well enough. And you just have this kind of chasm in terms of, you know, quality between, say, your regs and your guests. So I'm doing these shows. It's a thing that I identified very, very, very early on. If I'm bringing in guest cast, it's a process that I have to be across in a very intensive way. And I guess it all starts with the note then that goes, your first note that goes to the casting directors. So, you know, I'll draw up quite a detailed breakdown of who this character is. And even in some cases, I will offer casting suggestions from actors I know, or I may say, oh, it's this type. It's, you know, he's this type or she's this type. So it starts off with a pretty detailed breakdown of who this character is. And then, say, in the case of Casualty, we had an amazing casting director, Gemma Hancock, who is great. Like, Gemma, she casts her net far and wide. She goes to see an awful lot of stuff. She's really, really over the acting scene in terms of who's coming up or who's unknown or who's about to break through. So she will then send back 10 options for a cast. And generally those options are really well chosen, like physically, but also in terms of the personality as well. What was great about the last block of Casualty for the first time in about 3 or 4 years since COVID is I went up to London and I did the auditions in person. And that was amazing to be back in the room with actors. And I think what I tend to do in auditions is, depending on the part, I'll throw in a bit of improv as well, because I want to see how flexible the actors are. I want to see, do they have comic chops? Like, for example, if there's a character where there's room for a bit of levity, lightness, humor, I want to see, do they have those chops? So I'll throw in a bit of improvisation as well, and just test and see what their range is like, and see how they take direction. And then, I mean, generally, like, say, working with Gemma, like, generally of the 8 or 9 people that she shortlists, you'll always find somebody, and you know yourself, like, it's usually pretty obvious that one person who just jumps out. And recently on an episode of Casualty, we did this whole story strand about a hen party. And it was about this hen party that kind of went out of control, and something quite terrible happens at the end of the story. But it had the storyline. I liked it because it had that kind of wildness, and there was a kind of alpha hen figure who was kind of dominating and sort of driving the evening on, and it was getting more and more chaotic. I was looking for a very particular person for that. We needed a big personality. And on that block, we were still casting by tape, but this actor, Danielle Phillips, who played it, she was on holiday in Croatia, and she just sent this tape where she was like, "Hi guys, I'm on holiday, but I love this part." And just straight away, it was so obvious that she had the personality. She was from Doncaster. She says, "I know these girls." What was really clever about her audition was she spoke about how much she enjoyed the character. So I guess after I've cast them, then with my guest cast, then I, through the casting director, I'll get contacts for them. We'll generally have a Zoom call, and I'll go through, the story with them. And I guess that those meetings serve a couple of purposes. You're looking also to let them know how invested you are in their story and how excited you are in their story. So that kind of dynamic is very, very important. And also what your expectations are in terms of the story, and how, how fired up you are about it. So they need to see that. And then you go into, I always go into a lot of level of detail about characters, and you get them as active collaborators. And you get them thinking about, really who these people are. And when they come in for costume, and I drop down, I see them, and there's then there's further chats about, what they wear, how they look, hair and makeup. All of these are extra occasions then for digging into who these people are. So hopefully, having done all that, by the time they come on the floor, they've met me. As I said, I try and create a really sort of warm, friendly, playful atmosphere for them to step into. And then hopefully they're in the zone. And generally I've had great experiences with guest casts on the show, but they just I think you need to take all these steps with them to make sure that they're in the best possible shape to give you, to give you the performance, because oftentimes these guest casts can carry big storyline.
And you can let me know if you disagree, but I would think that your regs are going to give you that 9 as opposed to a 7.5 if they're playing off a guest actor who is bringing huge amounts to that role.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's beautiful to watch. We did a recent episode of Casualty. We had this storyline where Jacob came across this woman on the beach who had broken her arm falling over. She was in her 60s, and she's at one point she says, "My boy, he's in the sea." And the medics are like, "What do you mean he's in the sea?" And they rush over to the tides has gone out, and they rush over to the edge of the water. And then it turns out actually she lost her boy 20 years ago out to sea, and she's basically her whole life has been visiting this beach trying to capture the lost child. But this actress was absolutely extraordinary. Again, she gave it an astonishing audition that was so raw and painful. I checked in with her. I didn't have to do much there. I just said, "Look," I said, "your audition was amazing. You absolutely nailed it. I'm really looking forward to this story." She appreciated that call. We met her for hair and makeup and had another chat. But I mean, she said she was drawing on so much. She just said, I've access to this. And then when it came to doing the scene on the beach, when they came upon her and I tried to shoot it in a way that felt as live as possible, the actors were just, you could see it in their faces. They were thrown in the best possible way by the energy that she was giving and the anguish that she was communicating. And afterwards, hugs were exchanged, and the cast were so generous to her. But it was beautiful to see it, and the same with all the hen party stuff. I mean, I think what you're trying to do is I'm saying the hen party stuff. if you have a character like, say, Danielle's character who was playing Haley, and they're like a big domineering personality, I guess what I try and do as a director is when they come on the floor, I encourage them to be center of attention. It's almost like I allow the floor to be centerpiece for their big personality, you know? And like, she just was like big, loud, funny on the floor. I was like, you know, having a laugh with her. And it was, I guess that was my strategy, because I just wanted her to feel like she was queen of the set. So when we ran the cameras, when we turned the cameras on, there it was, you know, because she was the queen of this, you know, she was domineering. And so I guess what I do is I guess actors, I subtly create these different kind of environments depending on what the emotional charge of the story is. But in that instance, yeah, in some instances I want quiet, closed sets. In that instance, I was like, I wanted her to be queen of the set because big personality, and I wanted all that energy on the camera. So, yeah.
I love that. And I love the idea of creating different environments for different performers based on maybe what you're looking for from them from a character perspective as well.
Absolutely. I do it all the time.
You said that when you watched Danielle's tape, she kind of mentioned how much she loved the character.
Yeah.
She was thinking in character terms as opposed to just going and recording the sides and sending them back off to you. I was curious then, because it's not the same, but there may be similarities in terms of then when you have to go and pitch for a piece of work or a show or whatever you're maybe looking to move on to next. How do you approach that process? Some people that I have spoken to, the reason character struck a chord with me, have spoken specifically about going in and pitching the characters as opposed to the show, or opposed to maybe just me. And I was just curious what your take on that process has been. Earlier as well, I know you were pitching a lot early doors in the music video and commercial kind of world, and how your pitching process has changed.
When I'm pitching, I think you have to communicate what it is about the project that you're most fired up by. And in my experience, pitches that maybe in the past for me that may have gone wrong, and like this is feedback that would have come through, where I may have spoken a little too much about my visual style or how I'd shoot it or how I'd make it look, and not enough about character, like who these people are. And ultimately, I think in a pitch, that is the most important thing. I think any producer on a project is looking to see how engaged you are by who these people are. So when I'm pitching, I put a lot of thought into that, who these people are, how I identify with them, and how I can effectively bring them to life as a director, you know. So I think a lot about character, and I will foreground that, and then later on I'll talk a little. I'll talk more about, say, visual grammar or visual style or visual references. But I do think I've learned that what producers want to hear is how invested you are in the characters and the story world. So that's something I definitely emphasize now, because ultimately it's all about characters. I mean, this is what people are drawn to, you know. So I think maybe in the past, and this may be down to the fact that I came from acting, maybe a part of me felt, oh, well, that's all self-explanatory. You know, my job is actually to talk about the other stuff. Isn't that obvious? And actually, no, I think, you know, what producers, they do want to get a sense of how you connect to these characters and how interested and fascinated you are by them. And I think that's absolutely critical in pitching.
When it comes to your visual style, and listen, I know every meeting is going to be different, every pitch will be different, but do you arm yourself with a lot of visual tools, be it lookbooks or sizzle reels, or your kind of take on that world? And again, I'm very conscious that there could be an initial meeting, there could be then a meeting after that, and it could be 4 meetings in where it's like, here's a sizzle reel. But just curious of that aspect of how you communicate what it is you will do visually.
I try and bring a lot of visual material to the table, but I don't exclusively want that to be just stills from film. I think what's more interesting is if you're pulling in, visuals or quotes or, from other sources as well. And it could even be paintings. So I try and mix it up. Obviously, I mean, I use Shot Deck. It's a great resource. And it's a great resource for just pulling out, for mood boards and stuff. I think I also try, and it is easy for people to just go, pull a frame off, I want it to be this. I think what I try and do as well is it's your personal connection with the material. So I was pitching for a period drama at the tail end of last year, which was set in Victorian times. And say, for example, in my family home, there was a lot of, on my mum's side, there was a lot of old photographs of these Victorian, taken in Lafayette's and Grafton Street. And these figures who their images have always been on the family walls. And I've always been interested in who these people were. So I think as part of my pitch, I took images of these photographs and I said, from a young age, I've been very interested in these figures because they're more or less the tail end of the period we're talking about. So I guess outside of just like this movie or that movie, I try and mix it up into more of a collage and go, well, this image is more personal to me, or this quote from this book is really, really interesting, or this painting actually has something in it that actually I think could unlock something in here, something of the mood of the piece. So I do try and vary it up. I think that's probably my art college background, but rather than just just beautiful looking stills. I guess it's finding material that you have a personal connection to, because ultimately, I think for any project, I want to be doing work where I've got a personal connection to it. I understand, or I'm fascinated by this world. So yeah, I guess I try and communicate that as well.
And something like that, then, will you potentially use a tool like that then as the basis for communicating with your crew and
Absolutely.
your designer? And
yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things I'll pass on references, but also I don't know about you, Jason, but I find music is really important. And it's like every project I do, it's like a piece of music, becomes the kind of soundtrack for that project. And your HODs are great. They're used to getting, still images of I want it to look like this. But I'll often talk to my HODs about, emotional mood. And I might even send them a piece of music, as in this is the kind of feeling of the piece, or I'll send something more personal, or it could be a piece of text or something. And I think in my experience, HODs just love that, because you're giving them something a little bit left field, but not on the nose. And they really appreciate that, because also what you're doing there is that you're inviting them in as collaborators. That does two things. I think that sends a message to them that you want the work itself to have a kind of breadth, and you're going to be an open-minded collaborator, in that you're not going to sit there and go, no, I really think this should be the 28mm. Like, I know my lenses, I love lenses, but frequently with my DOPs, I'll talk more in terms of how this should feel, the mood I want this to create. And also more and more, especially in location work, the sense of being pulled into a world, into a story world, as in this physical environment is a world within itself. And that's a discussion with design as well. So say in the case of Casualty, I've just done the opening out to the new season. There was a lot of sequences where we just got pulled into these spaces because we had a storyline where this character was very much living in the margins in kind of halfway houses. And I wanted very much the sense of just the audience being pulled into these very intense spaces that felt visceral and alive. So a lot of my conversations with the design and DOP were about that sense of creating this very vivid space. And also, hey, it's this piece of music. Because I think music is really evocative, and like your collaborators love those kind of left field choices.
I love the idea of using music. It's something I've started to do more frequently. Even on like little pitch decks, you can go and just generate like Spotify barcodes and just put them on your PDF so someone can scan and listen to like whatever the kind of mood playlist or song is as they go through.
Is it? What are Spotify barcodes? I don't know this. That's great. So they can read a PDF document and go, boom, boom.
Yes, basically you could just pick up your phone, scan the Spotify barcode, and it brings you straight to, let's say, your playlist for whatever the project is, or this mood playlist or mood song, whatever. And in theory, they can just listen to that while they scrub through your deck, be it written or images, and hopefully it evokes more of a sense of tone, I think.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's tone, isn't it? I just think your HODs just love that. They love that. I mean, there was years ago, Kim Revel, I did the start of season 3 of Red Rock. I did this. It was quite a big episode with her, and she said, I wrote this script under the spell of David Bowie's Black Star, and Bowie had just died, and I loved the track. So as I was prepping it, I was listening to that track a lot, and it was just a lovely note to get from her, because there was something in the music that captured this sense in the episode of dread, and the idea of sort of being pulled towards something, something very unsettling, and it was great. Yeah, that was, as I was doing storyboards or thinking about scenes and staging scenes, I was playing that music a lot. I mean, music for me is hugely important, and sometimes it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost like the universe is gifting you something. Like you're in the middle of production, maybe because your mind is in that production. You could be walking to a supermarket, then suddenly you hear this track, and that track then becomes something that you listen to an awful lot over the coming weeks. It's almost like the universe has handed you this gift, but maybe it's just because you're in a particular mindset. But it's like the music can drop out of the universe towards you, and I just think you have to be receptive to it.
I love the idea of Kim mentioning Bowie and you then being able to listen to it, because how many conversations you may have to really dig into like someone's intention to make sure you really get everything they set out to do, but then someone says, this is the song I was listening to, and you can go and tap into that and you're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, you get it, and it's as I said, it's something that goes deeper than language. It's feeling, it's tone, and that's why I just think it's a great thing for me to do with my HODs. Have a listen to this. This is the chart. This is the tone, and like doubly so for feature films. I have a feature film in development, and when I get to make it, it's a genre piece with psychological horror, and music will be huge. Will be a huge part of that. And anybody who I collaborate with, they'll be getting playlists. So because I think that is, it communicates so much, as it beyond language.
You just briefly touched on scripts, and I was going to ask you about your process for reading scripts and beginning prep and moving scripts from one stage to being production ready. So I guess to start, instead of trying to answer all of them in one, how do you go about reading scripts when you first receive them?
I don't know about you, but for me, that first read of a script is incredibly important.
Yeah.
It's just so important, isn't it? Like that first read, because you're coming to it fresh. So what I try and do on that first read is just read it and just let it hit me. And then generally I work on scriptation, which is a really, it's a program which works really well for me. So I'll read it first, and I'll say to myself, just read it. But sometimes I just have to annotate little points, because I'm coming to it fresh, and you're seeing it, and I think that first read is incredibly important. So I'll do that first read, and I'll just let it sit as an episode. How's it working? And I'll see, because you're coming to it fresh, and you're going, okay, whose journey am I locking on to? How is this resolving itself? And am I convinced? Am I drawn in? So what I'll do then on the second read then is that I'll start to annotate in the script. And with scriptation, it's great because I just leave these little kind of envelopes along the side at every point, and I'll write notes in.
As you're going through that second read and you're annotating, are you annotating everything, or are you thinking in terms of story at this point, or performance, or visuals, or are you kind of whatever comes to mind you're annotating?
I think whatever comes to mind, but I guess those early reads, because the producer is on those certainly with shows like Casualty, your producer wants the feedback. So I guess primarily you're coming at it like, how is this story working? How is this working as a story? How is the script working? So I guess my notes at those points will be predominantly story. But if you come across something or a visual idea, you jot it down, because that's a very fresh, intuitive response to. And I don't know about you, but like there's something about that intuitive response. You just know it's like a little bell goes off in your head, and you go, I know how to shoot this. I know how to shoot this. And generally, in my experience, those little intuitive first impressions stay the course until you shoot, because there's something in those early reads. If you have these little moments of clarity in terms of how you see a sequence, there's a freshness to that, and there's real value in that. So alongside the story, if anything pops out at me in terms of visual approach, I'll write it down, because I think that's precious, because it's all that kind of first intuitive response, early responses to scripts, but predominantly story, because the expectation from the producer then is we'll be sitting down shortly with the producer and going through the story and going, okay, how's this all working, and what do we need to feedback to the writer? And that process happens, and then the writer goes, you might get your next draft the following week, but all the time I think depending on the scale of the notes, you can either crack on with that script, or if it needs huge revisions, you might have to park, say, one episode and concentrate on the second episode. I mean, in terms of reading, I read the script every day. Every day. It's like what I'm trying to do, I guess, is internalize the script. Like as a director, I have got to know the script intimately. I've got to know the script inside out. I have to almost internalize it, memorize it. So I will, most days I will read the script. So by the time it comes to shooting it, I have internalized this story and I know it better than anyone else. And I just think reading, just the act of reading it over and over and internalizing it is really key for a director. And the more you read it, the more you dig into it, the more you find ideas. Little doodles could become something else. And so I think that's advice that was given to me, a while back, about just from an older director. It's like, read your scripts and read them again over and over. You have to be the person who knows that script the best on the floor. And I think that's so true. And then if you've done that work and really internalized the script, when you step onto the floor to get it on its feet and bring it to life, you feel in a very strong position then, because you've really internalized it almost. And I think after those initial reads, I will then continue to read as I finesse my plans. But it comes up, the annotations sort of build and build and build, and what I'll try to do is color code. Like my blue annotations will be like, say, green story, blue visuals, red could be design, purple medical, yellow stunts. So I just try and feed an awful lot into the script. So then on the day I've got a very loaded document, and a document I almost know off by heart, because I've read and I've read and I've read, and I've tried and I've mentally walked through the script as much as I can, and I camera plan, but in the knowledge that when I get on the floor, there's still a whole lot of space that I have to explore. So frequently your camera plans could be a point to jump off from, or sometimes actually, no, that's exactly it. And I mean, like for stunts and set pieces, you obviously have to have it all pretty much nailed down.
In terms of your story notes, then it can be a delicate process, giving notes on scripts and talking about what's working and what isn't. How do you approach that part of the job? Kind of saying, there's loads here that's great, but there are things that just don't work and we need to fix them.
Well, say in the case of Casualty, you have a script editor, which is effectively a mediator between you and the writer. You and the producer are feeding the notes to the writer, but via a script editor. So the script editor is the diplomat. They're the ones who can take your notes and soften them accordingly if the language is a little too hard or whatever. So because I know I'm working through a script editor, I'll be pretty, not blunt, but I'll try to be as clear as possible. And the question I ask is, what's the setup of this episode? What's being set out? What's the problem? What's the event that turns things in their head? What is that problem? And how do we effectively go on that journey right to the very, very end? And I do discuss a lot the endings. Getting the ending just right is so key. There's a great quote from William Goldman, the scriptwriter. He said, "The key to all story endings is to give the audience what it wants, but not in the way it expects." And I think it's gold, that quote. And I think your ending is trying to get to that point. But you come to it early as a reader, and you look at, okay, what's the setup, and is it delivering, and is it maintaining its story promise? And last year, first episode I did of Casualty had a great setup in that it was a really good script in that something happens at the start where you think this woman has poisoned this kid. And what was great about the script was it just very singularly followed her anxiety nightmare through. And there was this real strong thread through the whole episode because of this mistake that she made, or this moment of carelessness where you're led to believe through her carelessness a child gets poisoned. And it was great. It was great to read that, because that was a script that absolutely set off on a journey and stayed really kept the tension. And I guess that's what I'm looking for, tension. Is there anything sagging here, or is the story being maintained? Yeah, is the tension being maintained through scene by scene? And are we going on an interesting enough journey? I guess one thing as well I always try and talk to writers about is humor. And sometimes, shows can be very dour, and I'm always trying to push for humor, because that's life. So even in, those scenes that might be heavy, I'm always trying to get a little bit of humor in them if you can. And as I said, in Casualty, you have the script editor to kind of communicate, to go between you and the writer. So, but on the last block, we had the first draft on the first episode needed a lot of work. And I guess the very first thing I did was I wrote to the producer, and I, line by line, I kind of did a very detailed breakdown of what I felt wasn't working. And she agreed. And then we just sort of got, put the thing into action. And because we knew, you've only 4 weeks to prep. So you really have to, and it's a very finite amount of time. So you have to, story problems have to be resolved straight away. They really have to. Because if they're left, the very last thing you want to be is on the floor with a bunch of actors going, "Oh, but this doesn't work," and trying to kind of cobble something together so I always try and avoid that. I with the producer and the script editor, I work hard on the script as well, just to make sure that by the time we get to the floor, it's in as good a shape as it can be. So, I mean, that's something as well, I think with directors. I think you have to be good script editors. You have to be able to, in terms of story, you have to be able to break down notes, and you have to communicate all that really, really clearly, because ultimately it's going to be on your shoulders. If you're lumbered with, a script that's just not working, it can be torture on the floors. You're just like, and the actors are kind of going, everyone's hanging out, and then time is passing by, and I do just want to avoid that scenario. So, you have to be so attentive to the script, and to absorbing the script. That's just a huge part of prep.
Totally. The flip of that then potentially being post. And I was curious then of how you handle your edits. So particularly from the perspective of coming from docs and drama and the differences there, do you shoot for your cuts in drama, or will you let things run a little bit longer and trust your documentary instincts? I feel, correct me if I am wrong here, or if you disagree, that, you know, your time editing MacIntyre's Underworld is probably very different than the edit on Casualty.
Yes, it's a different beast. Yeah. First thing I'll do in the edit is I will check in with the editor in prep, and much like any initial conversation with HODs, I will definitely check in with the editor, and I will say, I'll sort of introduce myself, introduce him to the story, and I'll talk about kind of tone and energy and how I want to shoot this, and I get that conversation going, and I'll fire music to them as well. And if I'm thinking of music in terms of, you know, key tracks or even mood music, so I will feed all that through to the editor in prep. On the day, like say in the case of Casualty, it's pretty fast moving show, so you don't get to shoot a whole lot extra. So I mean, I'll come in pretty prepped with a strong shot plan, but then on the floor I am also very open to what might come out with, because you know how it is, like when actors get the story on their feet and start to, you know, live and breathe the words, amazing things can happen. And suddenly, you know, that position or that plan or that shot goes out the window because you're faced with something much more interesting. And I guess that kind of documentary background I have, I'm always willing to just jump off and follow my nose in terms of what feels interesting. So yeah, I guess sometimes the editors will get surprises, but then I like to think I've given them enough then to even if I go off piste, I will be very quickly recalibrating my shot list so that, you know, okay, this was my route, it's now this, I'm off piste, but this is far more interesting. So if I'm going to do this, you know, I'll do this, this, and this as well. And so it won't be necessarily what my plans were, but it'll be something that's new and fresh. But I'm hoping that something is a coherent package in that I'll have thought about coverage as well.
Yeah.
And you know, and that's often as well, if you're doing something radically different, that is where your dynamic and your collaborative, you know, the relationship you have with your camera operator and your DOP is really important as well. Because you're like, I'll say, oh, this is actually much more interesting, and they're like, yeah, it is, isn't it? And then, you know, then that's a discussion. Okay, well, if you do this, then let's lose that, and that. But what we will need is this, this, and this. And again, the operators and, you know, and DOPs I've worked with are great. They're you know, they've an awful lot to add to those kinds of conversations. As I said, it is just sort of intuitively following what's interesting. And again, I think coming back to my documentary background, where you are constantly getting things sort of shifting and having to sort of recalibrate and reorganize things because of whatever life was throwing at you when it was, as I said, in those kinds of environments, life was coming at you fast and things would turn on a sixpence. So you had to sort of, that, whatever that muscle was, you had to develop it and learn to very quickly go with the flow in this more interesting direction. And I guess in drama, when something like that happens on the floor, when the actors, with that synergy of actors and camera, I'm like, yeah, let's go that route. And I'm very happy to go there. And I think those can be the scenes that are the most exciting, you know, where I guess I want everything to feel live. I want everything to feel immediate, I suppose. And when I came in to do Casualty with John Sen, who was the exec I'd worked with in EastEnders, that was absolutely the style of the show he wanted. He wanted to sort of bring more of an observational documentary feel to it. And, you know, people like Paul Greengrass and Barry Arkwright, these were the names that were thrown at you. So I was like, great. I realized now the value of projects like, say, MacIntyre's Underworld, which is now a long time ago, but I guess it taught me really good lessons in terms of intuitive storytelling, following your nose, seeing working organically with what's in front of you. So I guess my drama is a mix of, intensive prep, but then an open-mindedness when it comes to getting it on its feet and just trying to make it feel as alive as possible. That's exactly the stuff that'll just keep people glued to it at home, yourself when you're prepping, like I think about the viewer, I think about the person at home. People watch these shows because they're very drawn to the characters and they want a time out from their life for 45 minutes. And your job as a director is to take them on a roller coaster ride. And, so the troughs and the peaks have to be as well accentuated as possible. And it all has to feel very immediate. And actually, a recent block of Casualty I did, the whole hen party story strand was actually featured on Gogglebox. And the weekend after it was broadcast, my producer WhatsApp and said, "Hey, we've been on Gogglebox." And she sent me the link. And it was amazing to watch because as a director, you never get that live feedback from the viewer. But here it was, they did all the story beats of this hen party and intercut with all of these viewers just watching it and reacting in real time to it. And kind of almost beat for beat, it was exactly the kind of reactions I would hope we would get from the story. So that was amazing to watch. It was like I was given a glimpse into another world, even though obviously these people are cast and there's a part of it that is performative, but still it was really interesting to see the kind of live response to your work, because you're never privy to that,
That's great. Yeah, you never know. You never
know. You hope that people are glued to it, and at the moments where they have to shout and roar at the TV, that that's what they're doing, and your job is just to sculpt it so it's as intense and kind of lived in as possible. I suppose that's really, and again, I do constantly draw back on the doc work and those kind of environments that I was parachuted in, which many of which sort of took me out of my comfort zone, but I ended up loving that aspect of documentary directing, that sense of just parachuting into these worlds. And I went to very quickly read what this landscape was, what the power structure was, who's this person, that guy over there with the 60-year-old with the bag in his mouth and the Adidas tracksuit. He's been hanging around there for 15 minutes. He keeps dancing over us. What's his story? That kind of immersive documentary filmmaking. I now realize that actually it's had a huge impact on how I approach drama.
What do you think is the hardest part of your job as a director?
I guess the insecurity of the job, the pitching for jobs, the waiting for like jobs to come in, the kind of the patchwork quilt aspect of a freelancer's life. That's the stuff I probably struggle with most. This year is like, it's a quiet year. I mean, I'm not pitching, but I'm at the moment, I'm waiting to hear about projects, and that's the stuff I struggle with. Once I'm engaged in a project and I'm prepping, shooting, and I'm in the middle of it, I'm in my happy place. The stuff outside of that, the hustle, I guess, and that's the stuff that's draining.
I spoke with John Wallace recently, and John had said, "No is the normal," and I thought it was a great way. I hadn't heard it put that way before. No is the normal. And even though it is the normal, it still hurts.
No is the normal. I mean, you do these kind of, you check in with yourself and you go, I mean, I'm doing this over 20 years. And I go, there are times where you go, okay, like on a graph, I'll go energy expended and results and positive results. And the energy expended might be in red and the positive results in green. A big part of that chart is red. It's a lot of slog, it's a lot of hustle, and it's a lot of no's. I think what's really important is what's in front of you. What's the job in front of you? I think and if you're doing the absolute best that you can do with the project in front of you, and you're building on, work you've done previously, and you're not allowing yourself to be complacent, and you're conscientious, and you're putting as much effort in, and you're pushing yourself as well as a freelancer. I mean, in the last year, I've done 3 blocks of Casualty, which is 6 episodes, which has been wonderful. And I've got to do really big episodes, and they've been fun. But I guess each time I go back, I'm like, I want this to be better. I want this one to be better. What I did in that one was good, but this one I'm going to go one more. And I even said it to I had sort of the same DOP on this recent block as he the same as my previous block, and we got on great. And I requested him, and when we were checking in with each other in prep for the most recent block, I was like, I loved what we did on the last block. Now I want to go one more. And I'm because he absolutely could do. And I said the same thing to my camera operator, who was Julian Barber, who was wonderful, who I'd worked with on the first block. I said, we're gonna push this, because these are big episodes, and I want to see how good you guys are. Basically, you know what I mean? It was like, that's pretty much what you're saying to them. And then within the body of the show, then what we'll do then is, because we get rushes sent through every night. Every Saturday when I'm shooting, we create these WhatsApp groups with my designer, AD, producer, DOP operators, and you have these various little WhatsApp groups. And every Saturday, I will send a whole message, and I will have captured stills, and I'll say my frames of the week. I'll take stills of my favorite frames of the week, and I'll send it through to them. And that's just a great way of kind of creating that kind of camaraderie, and also reminding ourselves that the work we're doing is really good. So every Saturday, they joke with me on Friday. They were like, I'm looking forward to the frames of the week. And I was going, yeah, you'll have them tomorrow. I was sending a lot of images through, and it was just a great way of kind of generating that kind of team vibe, and also reminding ourselves that, the work was good, and all of the conversations and all of the collaboration we'd had up to that point, was really paying off, because we were all singing from the same hymn sheet. So I think things like that as well. I think it's such a social business, what we do as well. And I love being on sets. I love the crack. I love that collaborative dimension with all my HODs and my actors. And when I'm working with people, I want them to feel really positive about the project, and I'll send them the images of going, this looks beautiful, or and they'll really appreciate that. So it's just building that kind of happy ship, I guess, to sail in.
I love that. That's a great idea. Frame of the week, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. That's when I sent it through, and then everyone's responding and feeding in, and you're also saying, look, this is great work, guys. It's great work. It's really proper. It's proper visual storytelling. Yeah, it's really creating that sort of that strong sense of unity, and we're all pulling in the same direction, because it is, yourself. It's just so collaborative. It's so collaborative, and I just think all of your HODs have to be completely energized and drawn in as collaborators, and you want them to bring the absolute best that they can do, because it's going to make you look far better than you actually are. And as you said, empowering them and giving them left field references, trusting their imagination as well, in terms of what they can bring, And if you're leading in that way, I think that should trickle down, and all of those HODs will treat their departments the same way, and ultimately everyone on this ladder will be getting the best out of everyone.
Absolutely. A well-working set where the HODs are really motivated, the communication is really clear, everyone's pulling in the same direction. It just trickles down through all the departments, and you get that lovely kind of hum on the floor where, there's just that good energy where everyone is kind of knows what they're doing, and they're all well briefed, and that's just a great place for it. That's where you want your crew to be. Just that lovely kind of home of just, they're doing their thing, they're all briefed, and I'm there having these conversations with the actors to just tease out the nuances of the scene, and it's all managed by the AD. So it's just you're all the time angling for just that lovely energy on the floor, where you're all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, Do you have any recommended reads or resources? You mentioned William Goldman earlier. I'm not sure whether that quote's from Adventures in the Screen Trade or somewhere else, but
I think it might be, yeah. I think it might be, yeah. In terms of quotes, yeah. I mean, I'd mix it up between, say, books, yeah. I mean, I've always loved the series, Scorsese on Scorsese. There was a whole series of books. So like Scorsese on Scorsese would be a favorite of mine. He's a director who is endlessly inspiring for me. Has been since I was a very young age. Lynch on Lynch is wonderful. Just him breaking down his very particular way of working. Always been a huge fan of his. Cirque on Cirque, Douglas Sirk, who was director who directed these amazing melodramas in the 50s. His book Cirque on Cirque is an amazing book on filmmaking. A book I've read recently, which has really jumped out at me, was The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr, and it's an amazing book because it basically looks at the psychology of storytelling, but it delves into kind of neuroscience and how the brain receives stories and what happens in the brain when we hear stories. And it's just a deep dive into neurosciences, into story, how important story is for humans. It's a book that has breadth, but it has wonderful insights on storytelling. So, yeah, The Science of Storytelling, which I'm just about to read it for the second time in a year. That's become like an amazing resource for me.
amazing. Thank you very much for that recommendation. I'll pick it up.
Also, Martin Scorsese, anything by Martin Scorsese on cinema, his journey through Italy on Italian cinema it's a 4-hour documentary that is an absolute masterclass. But anything Martin Scorsese presents, I mean, he's got such a profound love for cinema,
100%. Conor Morrissey, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Jason.
And that's a wrap on Conor Morrissey. Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker's Playbook. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with a friend or follow and rate us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have feedback, questions, or topics you'd like me to cover on the show, please put them in the comments section on our Instagram page at the Filmmaker's Playbook Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Jason Branagan Director, and you can follow Conor on Instagram at Conor_more. Links and social media handles are in the show notes. Join me next week when I talk to writer, director, and producer Sam Atwell. Until next time.